Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Pikarski, and I give Dharma talks here in Venice, Florida, at the Blue Lotus Meditation Center. Welcome. Today, we're going to talk about the maintenance of the ego. In a previous video, I've talked about the creation of the ego, and now we'll talk about its maintenance. So, just to review a little bit, we saw the ego as a set of understandings that help differentiate ourselves from the environment. Knowing where our body is in space, being able to set boundaries. We know what we feel compared to someone else and our responsibilities. It's basically built up through life to help us function. It's based on actual experiences. It is a conceptual concept, a conceptual construct, and that is all. So it is a set of concepts we have about ourselves. And we form these set of concepts into an entity. The set of concepts are practical and useful, and the entity creates a lot of pain for us and is actually the center and hub of all the pain and suffering that we experience. So we have these set of constructs, and they're there, and they contribute to this belief in an entity because some things are true. Like if somebody asks me my name, I say Jim, and that works. So we have all these constructs that are apparently true about ourselves and are functional, but we take those and we imagine that there's some entity who holds those. The other thing that makes us create this entity, or gives us the illusion that there's an entity, is that we have a continuity of experience. So we're always experiencing, we're always aware, and that awareness is with us all day long. So there's this continuity of experience that we have, and we assume that that also implies some entity experiencing all this stuff. Well, there's just experiencing, there's no entity. So, we build this up throughout our lives, and then we have this entity, and then once we create this ego, then we feel like we have to defend it, and we think that it is ourselves. So once we create that ego, we develop all kinds of defenses to protect that ego, because we actually think it is us. So one of the defenses that we create is that anytime our mind is very silent, it creates anxiety for us, because this false sense of self lives in our thought stream. It's made of thoughts. And the thing about thoughts are the most ephemeral of just about anything. Thoughts come and go, and you can't even hold on to a thought for very long. You have to keep resurrecting it over and over and over again to think about something for a period of time, because thoughts come and go very quickly. So when our mind becomes silent, we get anxiety, and when we get the anxiety, we want to start thinking again. And this push for us to keep thinking is one of the things that maintains our ego. So the easiest way to do this is to create a neurosis. If you create a neurosis, or things that appear like neuroses, then we can keep thinking about these things all day long. So let's talk about some of the ways we do this. There's one way that's sanctioned by society that most of us use, and this is seeking success and feeling like success in some way, or being rich or famous or something like that will bring us happiness. So we seek money, fame, relationships, sex, God, power, and we seek these things because two reasons. One is that while we're seeking them, we get to think a lot, and we get to think a lot about ourselves in relation to these things. Either we think, oh God, what's wrong with me? I don't have these things. Or the opposite, I'm so great because I have them. So we're grasping on to these things because they all seem more permanent than thought. So if you have money in the bank, you can always refer to it. Oh yeah, I have money in the bank. Or oh, I have a nice house. Or oh, I have a nice car. So these things are much more consistent and permanent than thought. They tend to come and go too, but over decades, car will rot under, rot from, uh, if you keep driving, it'll just rot under you after a while. And a house will, only last maybe a few centuries. So we hope to create some kind of permanence for ourselves by grasping onto these things and identifying with them. And by constantly thinking about these things all the time. The other thing we think about is we think about problems. So it's interesting because our mind creates a problem a lot of times, and then we think about it. So we hope to get away from our problems, and we develop all kinds of strategies to do that. All this keeps the mind stream going and keeps the sense of self going. Other ways we try to deal with this, sometimes we try to reduce our awareness by escaping into ego-centered activities. So, for instance, we can escape into TV or drinking or drugging or something else. And a lot of times it's just to get away from the suffering we create thinking about ourselves. Some people, because of past experiences or just creating these things because they work, is that people get involved with fear. They worry about something. And they consistently worry about this. And as long as they're worrying about this, there is this false sense of self that appears to continue. The thing is that our survival instincts to protect the body get shifted over to the self. So what we have to do is we think we have to protect it, like with the fight or flight mechanism. So if the self is threatened in any way, then we want to fight. Sometimes if somebody hurts our feelings, we want to kill them. And we're also frightened. We're frightened that we are not what we think we are. And guess what? We're not. So we try to protect this imaginary entity. And so we have an imaginary entity, we believe in it, and then we have all these imaginary protections that we need to do, all these ego defenses that we need to do to protect it. The whole thing is a delusion from the ground. It's all just a way that we have been conditioned to create suffering for ourselves. So wisdom, acceptance, and love are threatening. They are open and beyond thought. When we're involved with an ego, we fear anything that we can't control, because anything that is beyond thought is uncontrollable. So sometimes people can be terrified of love. Their heart opens and they're terrified because they have it feels great, and at the same time it creates fear. What if I'm rejected? What if I get hurt? Some people turn away from love because love is beyond thought, and it doesn't either we transcend the ego in our love, or we give in to the ego and push love out of our lives. The ego tries to find solutions to its problems through thinking. So we ruminate about the past and we ruminate about the future. And the fact is, the only thing that really exists is the present. So our ego tends to live in the past and the future. The other thing we identify is with our preferences and our needs. We become ego invested. My family, my country, my political point of view. Once we get invested in these things, they become part of our ego. And once they become part of our ego, they become defensible. So we want to defend them. And some people identify with the strangest things. They'll say, "Oh, I'm a person that likes vanilla. I don't like chocolate." And they assert it like it's some huge thing in their life. And it's just the ego trying to find some way of distinguishing itself. It has to, because it's imaginary, and yet we believe in it. So it's put in this. We put ourselves in this situation where we're trying to make something that's unreal real, and that's a very difficult task, impossible. So the ego is basically an illusion, and it's based in thought. So it has all the characteristics of thought. So if we say to ourselves, I am good, then we've taken one side of a characteristic of thought, duality. So where there's good, there's bad. So if I say I'm good and identify with that, then I'm afraid that I will be bad in some way. Or I'm afraid I get angry if somebody says I am bad because I've identified with this idea of myself. So thought has all these characteristics like duality, it has separation, it has all these kinds of things that once we identify with our thoughts, we are subject to separation. We feel very separate from others. And so the ego is really the hub, the source, which all our problems and suffering revolve around. So the ego works through the thought stream. If you believe the thought stream, you are going to suffer. Truth lies outside the thought stream, particularly truth about ourselves, because we don't exist in that way. We don't exist as a entity, and a conceptual entity. These constructs are just there for practical use. They're not there for an entity. If you have these practical ideas of yourself, you can go get your license, and you can tell them what your age and gender is, and if you wear glasses or not, and all these things are factual and they're not problematic. And the ego too is because it's a fiction and it's based on a lie. Everything it says is a lie. So nothing the ego says is true. Would you believe someone that constantly lies to you? I don't think so. So once we develop an ego, then we have to do all kinds of things to try to sustain it. It's such a conundrum. It's so when you look at it, it's so stupid. We create an imaginary entity, and that imaginary entity has no basis, and then we have to scurry around trying to support it because we believe in it. And we don't even believe in it. We believe that it's ourself. And so we're feeling like we're going to die or be attacked if we don't support it, if we don't defend it. I think that once we create an ego, we are destined, fated to try to sustain it somehow, to try to defend it and keep it going. So the best thing you can do is really examine the ego and see through it. Because if you can examine the ego and see through it, then all these problems disappear. They're based upon false assumptions. And it is the central false assumption. And it's the most important. And it's the one that people don't realize the most. And it's also, for some people, the scariest one, because they really have to examine who they are and see the falsity of their ideas about this. Thank you.